I want you to close your eyes for a second. Perception, perceive, thoughts, actions, sanctioned into raw-dated factions. Think about it. Think about the perceptions of limitations and names diluged into stock-broking games, because we're all broken down into chains of shame. Now blame us, broken down to millions and billions of mind-boggling recipes, because everyone is included except me, you, her, them equals we. Yeah, we all ride the bus. Think about it. Think about the perception of a mind-boggling platform on a minimal-powered black storm in the midst of this noon storm. Think about it. Perceive about it. But definitely see about it. No assumption. Now, how many of us can recollect the first time we recognized ourselves as a part of being part of a community? Now, y'all can open your eyes. How many of us remember the people that have entered us into that membership? How many would you think? And who would those people be? I'm going to start out by thanking my grandparents, Alec and Marie Braylock. By the end of this talk, you're going to know what I'm talking about. So in 2013, a friend, Mike Green, and myself went to Thunder Bay, Ontario, to work with First Nation communities in an organization that looked to equalize justice for poor folk. We were there to do an ABCD workshop. No, not a training on the alphabet. But ABCD meaning asset-based community development. It was developed by my friends John McKnight and Jody Kretzman, currently at DePaul University at the Asset-Based Community Development Institute in Chicago. So to set context for that day, that training, that community building training, a First Nation elder got up. He introduced himself. He said, "We aren't here to build community, we are here to remember it." I was forever changed by the way he used that phrase, the way he used that word, remember. Remember. In fact, the etymology of that word started out just meaning body parts. But in France, in the 14th century, it became being a part of something whole. You see, that elder was saying that we're all members, and to be a member, you contribute something. I live in Indianapolis, Indiana. I live in a neighborhood on the cusp of changing, being gentrified. It's 30 blocks northwest of downtown. And the narrative around people in our neighborhood is that we can't do anything. We're broke. We need fixing. We use ABCD, meaning that we care for our neighbors. We actually give space for people to contribute. We start with the cup half full rather than half empty. We believe in the notion that every single person has a gift. So in 2004, my journey became to find and uncover the gifts and talents of every single person in my community. Find places for those gifts, celebrate those gifts, and utilize those gifts in ways that build community, economy, and mutual delight. That became the start of the Roving Listener. Now let me tell you, the first 6 months of my journey, that I uncovered a whole bunch of things, right? I walked through the alleys as I uncombed over 45 backyard gardeners. I wore out 3 pairs of shoes as I walked on the porches and discovered artists that were phenomenal. I even gained a little weight as I stepped into the kitchens of those poor folk who made phenomenal food. You see, this becomes important because no one thinks of us as having any value. So 4 years ago, I started to increase my efforts. I realized that I should not be doing this work alone. You know, my friend Dana says that simple things can be hard. So I started an engagement company called the Learning Tree. I made my neighbors my business partners, and they didn't have to put any money in it. But I did require them to add all their social and networking capital. You know what that is, right? Friendships. We do trainings around the country, actually around the world, on ABCD, community engagement, and controlling our own narratives. They make about $150 an hour. They give 20% of that back, and it goes back to our neighbors to support what they're already doing, the things that are unseen. Last year, 2016, we increased our efforts. We received a grant from a local organization called Reconnecting Our Waterway. They gave us $67,000. There's a story behind that. But it was a sign that things were rapidly changing in my place. It was being gentrified. 20 years, it wouldn't be looking the same. And most of us won't even know our neighbors. But since we were uncovering the gifts of people, we needed to make it visible. And we need to make investments. We took 80% of that money and put it into the hands of poor people. We are poor. We did a few key things that was very important. We hired neighborhood staff, right? Consisted of the four of us. Maurice Broadus, he's a novelist in my neighborhood. He uses his gift as a novel writer to create portfolios of joy of my neighbors. We call him the dream catcher. Then my neighbor who's here with me, Wild Style, the producer. His title is the Roving Illustrator. He's kind of a researcher. He uses his gift as a sound engineer and a photographer to make the invisible visible. Last but not least, we have Amanda Wolf. Her title is the Executive Spirit. She keep us legal. She do all our books, and she keep me in line. Most of my friends know that I'm an administrative nightmare. Yeah, I am. Some of the things that emerged out of our place was there were artists that started to emerge. There were parties. We made sure we invested in those things. We also said that if you could be a part of this, only things we required that you didn't do things that are obscene or illegal. We said to people that whatever you do, you can't do it alone. And you have to fail at a minimum of 3 times. Now, does anybody know why I said that? Anybody? Anybody? Because studies show that people on the margins are penalized for failing, even though that artists fail all the time and they create beautiful work. There were block parties, house parties that brought over 1,300 people over a summer. These were all people struggling with problems, even myself with mental illness. But they actually were making things, building things. These things we didn't do, they were already there. We started to emerge 50 residents around our neighborhood that created these exhibits on abandoned homes. There were stories of us. There became huge block parties as we gave our neighbors to say, all you have to do is bring 3 people together. And we invested in the well of the people that are in our place. You know, I think back on this and I'm wondering, where did I get this inspiration from? Why am I so passionate about this? Why are my neighbors so passionate about this? It isn't my education, not my formal education. I never graduated from high school. But I can pin this back to the memory of my grandparents and the stories that run through this house for the 43 years I've been on this earth and longer. Now, my grandfather, it goes back, my grandfather planted a tree when my mother was born in 1952. They lived in Indianapolis in a swamp. They all had cinder block houses. It was a place where the Kankakee River flowed underground into a place that we call Beck's Lake. It was also where the hospital dumped a biohazard, as the children in that neighborhood would walk over. See, no one treated them as they were sacred. Now, my granddad was an artisan, a storyteller. His mediums included cooking, wood carving, and singing. And he was a hell of a landscaper. Like, people used to go to his little square in the yard and say, "Do not step on Uncle Buck's grass," a.k.a. Granddad, because that's sacred. He was kind of a neat freak. Now, Grandmama, she worked hours and hours at food service at Notre Dame. And when my mother became a teen, that tree started to grow. And in times of crisis, the young people would gather around that tree. And my grandfather would actively tell stories and do magic tricks. And as they would leave that tree, he would remind them that life is truly abundant. You see, my grandfather and his neighbors knew what was sacred. Now, my friends will laugh at me when I say this, but it takes this type of structure that they were cultivating. You know, I say that because most people find me the most random person in the world. But I was at the Kettering Foundation in Ohio, and I heard Dave Matthews, the president, say, not Dave Matthews of the Dave Matthews Band, but the former president of the University of Alabama. He was talking about these type of structures, him and Edgar Kahn. They talked about blobs versus squares. To me, it was like amoebas versus skeletons. You see, it takes square structures to build this building. They have schematics. They're not flexible, and they shouldn't be. You don't want a person like me building this. And they're very predictable. Now, blob structures are much more complex. They're flexible. They're seemingly unpredictable. But you can move them. They change, kind of like us human beings. I believe that we should use blob structures to cultivate community. But if we're going to do this, there are some principles. There's a structure, the way we do this. And the way we first start is we have to have a commitment to 100-year work. 100-year work ensures that the practice of this culture will keep going 100 years after we leave this place, almost like trees. Now, are y'all getting the picture? You know, Granddad and his neighbors built this and cultivate this type of structure. They made space for every person in the life of the community. They made space for the contributions of their gifts. They cared for the well-being of one another. They celebrated. And more importantly, they did what I'm asking you to do. They did what that First Nation elder did. They remembered.